Hello and welcome to our panel titled Postcollapse Art Play. My name is Vuslat D. Katsanis. I'm one of the two co-founders of the Ministry of Postcollapse Art and Culture, MPAC for short. We are an art and research space currently based in Zurich, Switzerland, and we focus on connecting or forging a dialogue across the global Easts and global Souths since the collapse of the Soviet model of socialism. Our interest is on contemporary art since the end of the Cold War, in short. Joining me on this panel is the MPAC co-founder and visual artist Ilknur Demirkoparan, who's running the space in Zurich. She's currently in Zurich now. An MPAC affiliate artist, filmmaker, documentarian, based in Suriname, Keoni K. Wright. Together in this panel, we will speak about our individual practices as artists and scholars, how our private encounters and personal lives inform, for good or for bad, our practices, and how these experiences shape our collective work and our outlook toward the future. I will be speaking about the founding vision of MPAC as a platform with examples of some of our recent exhibitions. Keoni will speak about his time residency in Suriname, and Ilknur will speak about her return to abstraction and painting by way of Turkish mythology. Our hope in presenting these about our practice and presenting our discussion is to generate a conversation around what we value most in our collaboration, which is friendship, reciprocity, enjoyment, and play. So I will let the presenters introduce themselves when you're presenting, I think, if that's okay. Yeah, to have it all in one place. So my introduction of you is very brief, but I'll begin. My title is We Will Tell Our Stories and Have Fun Doing It. And I will be talking just about the last 3 exhibitions that we have curated through MPAC. And as the title of my presentation suggests, MPAC really is a platform where we wish to tell our stories on our own terms in the hopes of shaping the dialogue between the so-called East and the South from the vantage of what we call post-collapse art and theory. So the personal and what Fanon refers to as the lived events that inform our practice is scarring, to say the least. Entangled histories of wars, colonialisms, displacement. And speaking of the end of the Cold War is a recent memory. Our childhood has been impacted. We remember seeing televised footage of some of the uprooted people and our own migration stories. And as hard as these memories are to talk about, to remember, and to bring to the forefront, we also find in post-collapse art and theory an enduring insistence on joy and on humor as a way of coping, at least, and play as the wishful world-making, collective future-making. And so why 1989? Why the end of the Cold War? Like I said, in many ways, we are the generation that is, speaking of the contemporary, speaking of the arts of the present, we are the generation that entered into this newly shifted, rapidly transformed space. And I remember as a kid, the televised footage of thousands of people, for example, displaced from Bulgaria coming into the Turkish border. So 1989 for us marks not only the collapse of the Soviet model of socialism and the end of the Cold War, but this new rhetoric around the end of history, right? The end of time, and where all that has been needed to imagine has been imagined, all that's been needed to be hoped has been hoped, and all that was there has now failed, right? And being born into this new world is our childhood, our formative years. 1989 also marks a renewed, renewed nationalism, interethnic violence, rapidly shifting landscape, political borders being redrawn, currencies being debunked, passports being taken, and the rise of consumer capitalism, where capitalism is falsely now tied with an idea of civil liberties. And of course, again, resistant and countercultural practices, countering that false link between capitalism and liberty. As well as 1989 being the marker of a new global market economy, rise of new media, arts, and new technologies. And at least in the case of the United States, an understanding of a multicultural, a pluricultural kind of a hybridity of identities and spaces. So MPAC as a platform where we can tell our stories is really to understand the vicissitudes of these entanglements, these connections, not to try to, I guess, remain as, when saying as the East and the South, not to remain as the peripheries of a conversation, but to continuously decenter and recenter the myriad of human experiences, memories, family stories at the forefront. So as a platform where we tell those stories. I want to begin with MPAC's founding kind of originary, not the first, but the originary curatorial project, which is 1989. And 1989 specifically wanted to reach artists and art professionals, again, whose formative years were marked by the aftermath of the Cold War, to try to understand the contemporary from the vantage of the exilic, where an exilic is a condition that we think defines modern life. Exilic as a mode, as Hamid Nafisi, for example, calls it the exilic mode, right? One doesn't necessarily have to physically be in exile to experience exile. So the experiences and worldviews of minorities, the stateless and the displaced, and specifically trying to find a network for those who might not adequately find an infrastructure within the contemporary art discourse. So one problem, we issued this open call, and we were very pleasantly surprised that artists from geographies and locations beyond what we imagined responded to our open call, really helped us expand our vision, our understanding of the revolutionary kind of moment of 89. Again, we have, for example, Keoni from the Suriname vantage. We had artists from Cuba, Iran, and Hong Kong, China. Some artists responded with very coded proposals for the exhibition and wished to remain coded rather than very explicit in their discussion of the critiques of the politics and so on. And some were very, very clear and very, very confrontational. So we were very happy to see that this proliferation of examples and stories from across the world helped us find this exhibition where, I want to quote one of the most influential thinkers to me in my own studies, an anti-colonial scholar and author, Ngugi wa Thiam O, who calls it a global ectics, right? Not a dialectics where you look from the centers of knowledge out and elsewhere, but now elsewhere is the center, the there is the here, many, many centers in the hopes to form exchange and reciprocity through creativity and through enjoyment and coming together in friendship and collaboration, rather than the Hegelian life or death struggle, right, for recognition. So in the 1989 exhibition, our open call spoke directly about post-collapse as a framework to trace the contours of the new art critical context since the collapse of communism and the Eastern Bloc. And we had examples from artists who experienced the fall of the Berlin Wall in Germany, artists who are still living through the aftermath of the Tiananmen Square massacre in China, the end of the Iran-Iraq War, death of Khomeini, the execution of Ceausescu in Romania, Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, the breakup of Yugoslavia, the formation of new nation states around Central Asia, and the mass exodus of peoples uprooted languages and their legal rights along with their families and their homes. And so in our PR, we described 89 as the year of revolutions from the fringes of the former West, because not only our landscapes, not only the East or the South has changed, but now the West as we know it has changed. From the fringes of the former West to the afterworlds of an emergent East across the global South, 1989 rips through borders, speaking to the absurd and the absolute, the fantastic and the fragmented. So I want to I hope I have been able to sort of give a survey of some of the ideas and some of the context that MPAC is interested in exploring, but also this return to the idea of play and joy and friendship and collaboration. In many ways, telling these stories, talking about, again, as formative years as children is difficult. And again, we found out as we're talking with artists and our professionals in our generation, one common problem was the problem of fit. Where do you fit in the contemporary discourse? How are you relevant? How is this experience relevant? And rather than trying to prove the fitness or rather than trying to prove the worth, we're just here to tell our stories and having fun doing it. So one example is from an artist who's currently based in Russia, Anna Syarova, who presented her Comrade Che. And if you're familiar with the Soviet children's cartoon, Comrade Che is this character, sort of like the Russian or the Soviet version of Mickey Mouse. These little episodes of moral stories, moral conclusions, and towards the end of the Soviet Union apparently became a little bit rebellious, kind of coded critique of the regime. So Comrade Che is Syarova's sort of nostalgic looking back into this era of her childhood where it's a complicated past, right? Nostalgia is always complicated. It is not the good old years that you wish to have back, but still a very happy childhood, perhaps in some aspect, in the intimacy of a family home, in the happiness of a child watching a cartoon. Here we have Keoni's installation view of the film Suriname Veteran, which is an experimental short documentary of the memories of a former maroon foot soldier in Suriname, talking about this, again, very complicated, very difficult history of the Suriname Civil War. And I don't want to say too much since Keoni, you're here, I'm sure you will talk about. But we're seeing, again, this personal oral history tradition, right? Documentary, listening, a kind of a critical listening, deep listening, standing next to and letting the person speak, letting the person reveal how formative those years are for good or for bad. We have Monica Sheets, who produced this work as a kind of how do you say, like an interview, participatory art, where in Germany, she asked people who lived through the collapse of the Berlin Wall how they have experienced the unified Germany. And one of the responses, overwhelming responses, is that Germany has unified, but our certainty is lost. We have gained a unified country, but we've lost our certainty. So life does go on. Now everything is changing quite suddenly with the standard of living, right? This sort of doubt, hesitation, and worry, while at the same time being happy that the wall came down. Another German artist who lived through the fall of the Berlin Wall is Hagen Klennert, and these are sort of diaristic, quick sketches on regular, like, notebook paper, short, small-sized kind of renditions of his memories living in Eastern Germany, and memories of people escaping to the West. And here we have Crimson Cloud of a person who is pouring gasoline, very violent, but you can see in the etching that this sort of like a quick and a hurried, almost afraid to lose that memory, trying to hold on to something in order to archive it. Lenka Holikova is an artist from Czechia, and the Blacklist series, and this is just one example, is a series of graphite etching of the names of people who died while trying to escape the barbed wire fences in Czechoslovakia. And again, as an homage to the victims and their surviving families now, to try to preserve their names, in order not to forget this moment in history. And it's a graphite pencil, so you can see line by line, this blackness, this dark square is the artist drawing in the pencil and pin etching the names. So a very labor intensive kind of commemoration. Nathaniel Prescott is currently based in Oregon, Czech migrant family, and his Monster Head series speaks to the homelessness crisis in the US specifically, but also the way in which the homeless and the economically deprived, let's say like impoverished communities, are often seen as monstrous, are often seen as beasts. And in this one example, it's about the artist's experience of not finding a dental care, right? Where you feel like your teeth, like you need so much kind of help and care that is denied to you, the self becoming the monstrous other. Stas Orlovsky is a Moldovan American artist currently living in California, and his flag is actually, it's very difficult to see, but there's a projected video, again, from the Soviet era TV shows. It's an upside down flag as a kind of a recollection of collapsed nation states, but again, also of exile and what the flag was meant to represent, right? And the kind of the death drive and the death association with the nation state. Kate Walker's video in, oh my goodness, I can't remember in which state in the Midwest, but a queer bar, karaoke bar, where people are going in and singing the REM song, It's the End of the World, and I Feel Fine. And it's a karaoke, so it's this huge celebration, huge partying together in community, but really like singing out your pain, right? Singing out your struggle. One of the responses from a Hong Kong-based artist was from Eric Fungi Lick, who's, I would rather hold my breath because breathing you in brings tears to my eyes, is from the state TV censorship of the June 1989 events, during which if there is a demonstration on the streets, and the TV would prefer to show or keep playing or replaying on repeat the current weather. However, despite the censorship, there's significance of the humidity in the air, right? And the weather, the numbers on the channel. And so it's this very abstracted, poetic way of speaking. It's the silences in the narrative that is articulating a kind of a displeasure and a critique. Same artist's installation view of a jacket from the Uyghur region in China, alongside a poem from an epic military poet from China that is in juxtaposition, trying to articulate the bodily struggles and the labor and the kind of violence involved in like forced labor, enslavement, and nationalisms. And a Turkish artist, Esra Nesipoğulları, early 2000s in the artist's mind, as a kind of a throwback to early 2000s, right? Where if we think about nostalgia as being the 80s, the 2000s is now suddenly this sort of like a glitch reality, this abstract sort of digital that is defining all social relations and shaping relationships in general. In Iranian young artist, again, Hamid Shafi from 2021, who's The Fool, makes a statement that the artist wishes to change nothing with this work. And I just want to pause on that statement for a second, an artist statement as wanting to do nothing, wishing to change nothing. And finally, a Romanian couple, Silvia Amenche and Bogdan Armenu, whose red-headed beheading of knowledge is a kind of satirical, experimental short video on the discourse surrounding the Eastern Bloc and the experience of communism and the sort of the binary thinking between communist and capitalist pasts and futures. It brings me to, again, this idea of how to tell these difficult stories, how to keep doing this work, and how to insist on decentering and centering while still wanting to remain standing, if not remain hopeful. It's tiring. It's tiring mentally and physically. But how do we remain standing, if not hopeful, when we're doing this work? And how do we insist on telling these stories and reaching out to one another and supporting one another despite what experiences we may have, where we may come from, finding new solidarities, new allegiances? And this is why we arrive at this concept of play. And, you know, Freud has this idea that the artist is the creative player, right? You play because you kind of want to break the rules, and you've got this childhood imagination that is not yet disciplined into the normative processes. But I think play here is a way of taking care of one another in a different kind of way, a way of acknowledging the difficulties of the past, but also how we resist, how we endure, how we overcome, right? The power of collective action and the power of being able to reach out in sincerity and earnestness. So the first Europe-based exhibition we organized is a 3-person exhibition from the works of Keoni and Ilknur and Charles Edward Williams. And this exhibition, again, each artist is looking at the personal. And here is an example from Ilknur's work. Again, I won't say too much because I'm sure you are going to. Looking at how you come to think of yourself in relation to others, how you come to experience the world. In the case of Keoni's documentary, Aboma, the sort of new interspecies thinking, right? Where the wild and the scary creatures from the swamps, like the alligators or the spiders or the snake, right, is actually playfully represented and almost even dignified, right? The story, like the alligator, the seas, right? The anaconda experiences, and we are coexisting in these spaces. Second in the series of play is our current exhibition. It's currently on until October 21, is Naomi Middleman's Delusions of Certainty. And Naomi's work is, again, based on her personal experience of migrating from the US to Germany to Switzerland, to her generation, her family's generations, her grandmothers, and her great-grandparents shuffling around the world, but also trying to understand that particular experience in relation to the wider geopolitical. So one day she said she came across these vintage maps from the 1920s and 70s, colonial maps of Africa and maps of Europe. And she carved out the roadways of the maps and reassembled them. And the vintage quality of the paper, the eroding print, gives it this very organ-like, this internal body-like looking feel. So ultimately you have these like sculptural sort of, I don't know how to say it, cutout drawings, paintings, and lots of painstakingly hand-etched prints of the work. And again, I want to say why we're returning to humor, the difficulties of these stories. We come together to try to support each other so that we can continue on. And so we're not trying to make fun of or lighten up or anything, but to be able to continue talking and to have it heard. And I just want to serendipitously end on this poem I came across. I hope I'm good with time. David White's, an excerpt from the poem, I think is kind of very fitting. And if you wanted to drown, you could, but you don't because finally, after all the struggle and all these years, you simply don't want to anymore. You simply had enough of drowning, and you want to live, and you want to love, and you will walk across any territory and any darkness, however fluid and however dangerous, to take the one hand you know belongs in yours. And I will end here. Thank you. And next in line, we have Keoni.
Thank you very much, Vuslat. Very well done. I will share my screen here. Can everyone see?
Yes, we
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Excellent. Okay. I'm Keoni Wright. I'm an experimental filmmaker, a documentarian, and a wire artist. And, over the last 2 years, I have been fortunate enough to give several talks about my artistic process. And as you will see, the tiny South American Caribbean nation of Suriname plays an immense role in the art that I produce. I often refer to this place as the cradle of my creativity. But what I often unintentionally leave out of these presentations is how I came to be in Suriname and how Suriname even entered my purview. If I'm going to be totally honest with you, without disrespecting Suriname's diverse communities who seemingly pull tight a vibrant quilt over South America's smallest country, a quilt that extends over a landscape that hosts the world's most dense rainforest, I sometimes think Suriname is a place that I manifested. Suriname did not exist for me before 2017, and apparently it still does not exist for some people, even those who claim to follow my work more closely. At a recent family reunion, I was asked several times by several cousins what it's like to make movies in Africa, which is kind of the artist's equivalent of someone at the dinner table saying, "Would you please pass the jelly?" Ironically, when using Google Maps to prepare for this presentation, one moment. Sorry about that. I started at the back there. Ironically, when I was preparing for this presentation, I used Google Maps. And if you'll notice here, Suriname is the only country that is not labeled on this map. So I began to even question then if Suriname actually exists. But we know that it does. And just so that we're all on the same sheet of music, here is Suriname, nestled in between Guyana and French Guiana on the Caribbean coast of South America, comprising an area that is often referred to as Amazonia. Over the next 15 minutes or so, I want to stick to the program and delve more deeply into the themes of fugitivity that can be found in my work and in my life. But to give you a better idea of why I chose Suriname, or why Suriname chose me, I think it is important to establish the role of spirituality in my life. Spirituality as active reverence for ancestors, nature, the animate, and the ability to create something and imbue it with the essence of intentions. My connection to the animate can best be seen through my wire sculpture works, many of which were created in Suriname and also in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'll scroll through some of these kind of quickly just so you can see some of the wire sculpture work. That's not necessarily the vein or the theme of this presentation, but I do view sculpture as a means of storytelling, and it can be a very nice sort of personal break from movie making. Lots of sharks, bears, no lions, no bears. As many of you probably know, there's little in the way of vocabulary for describing the profound spiritual experiences describing profound spiritual experiences. The irony is that two of the most suitable words to explain the why behind my connection to Suriname are remnants of my time spent at a Catholic junior high school and a Catholic college. Vocation and calling are the words I am speaking of. They represent a good starting point for understanding my connection to Suriname, but they are certainly not the full Monty. Another word that doesn't get thrown around the public school system much is faith. And when I think about the essence of fugitivity, the concept of faith rises to the top. Faith is something closely connected to intuition. How does the fugitive survive ultimately while on the run, moving from place to place? How does he or she know where to go, when to move, who to trust, who to avoid? Intuition, not fear, is the answer. During the 16th and 17th centuries, Suriname's slice of Amazonia was the tropical backdrop for wars waged between runaway slaves and European, namely British and Dutch slave catchers. From the European colonial perspective, these runaways were not just runaways, but from the perspective of Suriname's present-day Maroon community, their ancestors did not run from anything. They flew off of plantations. The enslaved African finding freedom through literal flight is a theme found throughout the Americas. So already we see that the Maroon quest for freedom has a deeply spiritual starting point and an ability to access an intrinsically African cosmology from across the Atlantic. European shackles could not only bind the physical until the spirit set the physical free. I want to take a moment to clarify the word maroon with regard to its use in Suriname. A maroon is a person descended from escaped enslaved persons. In short, they are people who emancipated themselves. They are people who found freedom on their own terms. And in Suriname, they are regarded as an independent ethnic group. And here are some photos of present-day maroons, to include a painting in the top left-hand corner. And it gives you just a little bit of insight into the living conditions, the traditions, sort of how they live their everyday lives. Sometimes when people see these photos, they think that maybe this is some sort of a tourist attraction, or that these are things or performances done at the behest of tourists. This is everyday life in Suriname for Maroon people. Present-day Suriname is home to 6 Maroon tribes: the Aukaners, the Aluku, the Saramakan, the Quinti, the Paramaka, and the Matawai. Some of these tribes ended up mixing with indigenous groups, while others, to this very day, reflect a bloodline that is 100% African, and their way of living, customs, and language reflect a direct connection to West Africa. During my first trip to Suriname in 2017, while trekking through the rainforest with some friends, I was pleasantly surprised to stumble upon a Maroon village. I instantly found love. And as someone who has taken part in many boundary dissolving ceremonies and rituals throughout North and South America over the last decade, nothing within the realm of reality was more trippy than to find a thriving slice of Africa nestled in the thick of Amazonia. What exactly were enslaved Africans running from? It is not enough to just say slavery. In the case of Suriname, the sketches produced by this region's most famous slave bounty hunter give us unique insights into the enslaved African's plight. Slave catcher John Gabriel Stedman's sketches of the lives of enslaved persons in Suriname were proliferated throughout Europe in the late 17 and 1800s. He also wrote a memoir entitled The Narrative of a 5 Years Expedition Against the Revolted Negroes of Suriname. As you can see, these sketches are quite graphic, and they really make you wonder about Stedman's ability to sit and sketch these scenes of unfathomable suffering. This particular sketch of an enslaved woman in Suriname, forced to work with a 10-pound weight balanced on her head and chained to her ankle, inspired me to make my first experimental film entitled Released. I wanted to make a work that was the antithesis of Stedman's sketches, particularly those depicting women. And just one quick note on the legacy of Stedman. Someone argued that the proliferation of his sketches and his memoir point to a man who is sensitive to the plight of slaves in Suriname. The memoir, which features the love affair he had with an enslaved woman, has also helped fuel a romanticized version of a conflicted slave catcher. His sketches did reach the hands of abolitionists in Europe who used them to bolster their cause, but I contend that the intent of his ambitions was to assure the masses in Europe that the slave machine was running smoothly, and to also paint himself as a man of adventure and intrigue. My experimental film Released is a non-linear, multi-layered artist film which highlights 6 women of Afro-Surinamese descent who passionately express themselves through the traditional performance arts, martial arts, and visual arts. Released opens with an infamous portrait of an enslaved African in Suriname bound and attempting to balance a 10-pound weight on her head. Such depictions circulated throughout Europe during the 18th and 19th centuries. This is how the world came to know Suriname, formerly Dutch Guyana. As a least sought after tourist destination coming to terms with modernity, Suriname is often viewed through colonial eyes and continues to feel the weight of lines of power drawn long ago. The film's depictions of strength, independence, and liberation through the arts provide a salve to the geographic and racial perceptions that linger still today. Each pair of women in the film is juxtaposed by backdrops which reflect outdated ideologies and systemic oppression. The dancers dance barefoot in the city square, where drab Dutch architecture and commercial buildings point to a suppression of traditional, more vibrant forms of expression. The kickboxers hone their all-encompassing craft in front of Fort Zeelandia, where slaves were often punished. The visual artists live with their artwork in a modern-day home, where a woman can find herself bound by domesticity. The cutting or ripping of fragile shackles throughout the film was inspired by Suriname's Keti Koti, or chain cut, Emancipation Day celebrations. Here are just some production stills from Released, which was my first project in Suriname and eventually led to this project, a documentary film entitled A Posse for Romeo, or Romeo's Road, which was also adapted into a much shorter experimental piece, which Vuslat spoke about in her opening, and was a part of the 1989 exhibition. And to my knowledge, I think it was the only film, not just from Suriname, but just representing that part of the world, South America, the Caribbean. So it's always nice in these exhibitions, no matter how big or small they might be, to sort of be an exporter of Suriname and its history, and to open people's eyes to what is happening there. After Released was finished and in the can, I started to delve more deeply into the Maroon culture in Suriname, more specifically their role in Suriname's civil war, which raged on from the capital city of Paramaribo and deep into Maroon rainforest territories from 1986 until a peace treaty was signed in 1992. It is a slice of history that is still fresh in the minds of many Surinamese people, but it is a topic that few local filmmakers dare to broach. Suriname's civil war was the epitome of Tropic Thunder, inside actors melding their agendas with those of outside actors to include France, Libya, and the United States, just to name a few. During that period, Suriname became a hotbed for mercenary activity. Essentially, the war started as a result of the Maroon community's feelings of being underrepresented at all levels of government. They felt as though they had no voice in the face of a mounting communist agenda that was not only spreading throughout Suriname, but throughout much of the Caribbean and South America's Caribbean coast. The Maroons fought under a united front known as the Jungle Commando against an army led by Suriname's then de facto dictator, Desi Bouterse. In 2018, I had the pleasure of visiting the Maroon village of Witagron, which is the ancestral homeland of the Quinti people. There I met a former Maroon foot soldier named Romeo Kofi Maga. And after sitting on his porch for hours, listening to his harrowing war stories, I determined that I absolutely must make a documentary about the man, his time fighting for the Jungle Commando, and about his present-day commitment to fighting for the rights of his people. As you might expect, to this very day, Maroons are a marginalized people in Suriname. But just like their runaway fugitive ancestors, they remain exceptionally righteous in the face of discrimination and modernity's pitfalls. In 2020, in the midst of COVID lockdowns, I managed to sneak into Suriname during a one-week trial opening of their airport. I arrived in Suriname at midnight, and when I woke up the next morning, the government had decided to seal its borders once again to all outsiders. But once you're in, you're in. Without wasting any time, my filmmaker colleague and I ventured into the Western rainforest to begin shooting my documentary about Romeo's life, which, as I said, came to be A Posse fu Romeo, or translated from Surinamese, Romeo's Road. Unlike the handful of documentaries who had turned their lenses on Suriname's civil war, I avoided the war's overarching geopolitical implications and focused my attention on the story of one Maroon commando. And not only would Romeo recant his story through interviews, he also creatively reenacted scenes from his time fighting in the war. There's the director and Romeo giving some guidance, although most of the time I think he was giving me guidance during this project. What's interesting about A Posse Fu Romeo is that essentially I took a man who identifies as a fisherman, a hunter, and a boatman, and now he is able to add actor to his burgeoning jungle CV. What I learned from embarking on this creative journey with Romeo was that in the case of the Maroons, it has been a constant fight for freedom since days of old. The wars they have waged have taken many forms and have gone by different names, but the constant goal is maintenance of a particular way of life, a way of life that equates to freedom in the eyes of men like Romeo. And I think we can apply this way of thinking to the fugitive mentality. Fugitives chase freedom because they believe that they are entitled to it. They do not run from anything. They only run toward their vision of liberation, and once they find it, it must be maintained at all cost. In the case of Suriname's Maroon tribes, I would argue that they have not run away, they have returned. Here are some more photos from my time with Romeo. This was the interview aesthetic that we used, bright and vibrant with the jungle in the background. And there's the director and Romeo. You can see the look in his eyes, probably unsure of what I want. Probably feels like he's already got it and doesn't need guidance. But you also get a little peek into what Witagram sort of looks like and sort of what his living conditions are like. You also see the traditional pangi that is worn across the body, worn by men and women. And here's another interview that I did with a Maroon historian, Martina Amoxi, who plays a major role in sort of tying up all the loose ends and connecting all the dots with regard to Romeo's story throughout the film. And as an independent filmmaker, it's all about doing it on your own. So it's lights, camera, action, makeup, what else? Sound, whatever needs to be done. And um, that is my filmmaking colleague in Suriname, Claudio Barker. And when you don't have the money for a camera car, the best way to make a camera car is to have the cameraman sit on the roof. So that gives you a little bit of insight into A Posse Fu Romeo. And I will admit that up until this point, we have wandered down some pretty serious lines of inquiry and discovery, especially for a presentation headlined by an exhibition entitled Play. So then let's lighten things up a bit with a trip down Suriname's back waterways in search of the elusive queen of Amazonia, the anaconda. My experimental slice of black and white noir nature entitled Aboma Aboma is a 7-minute creative doc that follows Surinamese bushmen and conservationists as they scan jungle waterways for abomas, or anacondas. When Vuslat and Ilknur approached me about doing a small group show on the theme of play, Aboma Aboma came to mind immediately, primarily because it is the antithesis to many nature documentaries out there. If Released is the antithesis to Stedman's work, then Aboma Aboma similarly counters mainstream nature docs, which put stuffy men in khaki safari suits at the forefront of hyperbolic searches for jungle monsters. Somehow, in those mainstream nature docs, the jungle always seems to be nothing more than the backdrop. In Aboma Aboma, though, Suriname's rainforest is actually the main character, an essence and energy that speaks through chance encounters with various flora and fauna, birds, mammals, and reptiles. I also bring into focus the playful mentality of Suriname's most skilled bushmen. One of them seen here in this photo. He's kind of one outside of the jungle, being sort of the main character. This gentleman, who is a Surinamese bushman named Steve or Stevo, would be kind of the co-star of this film. And I spoke about the playful mentality of Suriname's bushmen. None of the bushmen in this film are peg-legged. None of them hell-bent on finding the anaconda, nor do they feel pressure to take their journey too seriously because they realize that nature actually owes them nothing. So why not enjoy the ride instead of being too focused on seeing an anaconda? Their search is not a competitive one. It is an opportunity for enjoyment. Here are some more photos from our search for abomas or anacondas. Stevo at the helm. And there's the rest of our crack team. This is at the beginning of our journey. And along the way, throughout the film, you see several animals, including many caiman, who pop their heads out of the water to take a look at us. I briefly mentioned the timing of my arrival in Suriname to shoot A Posse for Romeo at the height of the pandemic. On that particular trip, I chose to remain in Suriname for a year and a half, confident that I had nestled myself neatly in some immigration gray area, although my Suriname visa had definitely expired. However, 6 months later, when A Posse for Romeo was finished, I had been chosen to attend the Amazonia and Caribbean Documentary Film Festival as a guest of honor in neighboring French Guiana. I did not let my expired visa keep me from attending. While other attendees to the event flew in from as far away as Haiti, entering legally with COVID test results in hand, I developed a scheme to enter French Guiana for the festival and re-enter Suriname so as to avoid deportation. First, I used a trusted driver who could sweet talk several Surinamese guards at 2 key immigration checkpoints. I also armed him with 60 American dollars and which was about half of the guard's monthly pay. Once through the checkpoints, the driver dropped me in a boat, which is seen here in this photo. That's my loan bag. I paid the driver about $10, and he took me across the river in less than 10 minutes, which would be actually entering into French Guiana. So we arrived on the shores of French Guiana. Once ashore, I tried my best to mix in with the hundreds of Maroons who hustled goods between open air markets on both sides of the river. It wasn't long before I caught the eye of the gendarme and was brought to an official immigration checkpoint. No stamps in my passport, no COVID test. For lack of a better term, I figured I was fucked. Luckily, I'm very good at playing the aloof American when I need to, with all of my belongings strewn out on parking lot pavement. While 2 military police officers from the French Foreign Legion searched me, we haggled with each other through broken English. And yes, even at that point, my English was broken. I just kept reiterating that I was a guest of the Ministry of Culture, and I kept pointing to the illegal river traffic behind me as if to say, they're doing it. Why can't I? Until finally I was let through, if only because the gendarmes were amazed that an American had shown up on their doorstep in such a manner. I must have been truly confused. And because I was an American, they even felt obliged to apologize to me. I'm not bragging about this. It actually pains me to know that my Americanness is what saw me through to the other side in this situation. Long story short, I proceeded to rock out at the film festival for the week, representing A Posse for Romeo to the best of my abilities at several screenings. At the week's end, I found an even more porous, more remote section of the border to cross, and then bribed 2 sets of guards once again until I was back home in Suriname. And here I am at a panel at the film festival, translation headphones on. And here I am waiting for my boat back into Suriname. Yeah. So it's important, I think, in my life to be able to dissolve boundaries as an artist and as someone who has found the cradle of their creativity in Suriname. And there are probably many more themes of fugitivity that run rampant throughout my work and in my life, but I've only got 20 minutes. So there you go. So thank you to ASAP and the University of Washington for allowing me to present today. And I invite all of you to check out my website and my Instagram. And I look forward to connecting with all of you further. Thank you. And I believe next we have Ilknur.
Oops. Okay, sorry. Just here and then slideshow. Okay, so my presentation, I didn't know what to call it, so I went with Finding Home, because there's a question that I keep asking myself what I'm doing in my work, like what is it that I'm doing? And the best that I could answer with my work was that I am trying to find my way home. The way that I thought about presenting was in the last ASAP 12, I presented on the journey of how my work evolved to where it is now. And I also wrote a artist essay in ASAP Journal that was published on December 2021, as part of the cluster series on Postcollapse art. And I titled that one called How I Arrived Here, an artist essay or a long-winded artist statement, or possibly both. And my work started out with me, of course, trying to understand what it is that I was doing, or how I was perceived growing up in America, coming to America. And I keep remembering Eddie Murphy movie, because that was when we were still new in America, and he was also new in America, and he was trying to make sense of things. And I remember laughing so hard to that one and identifying with a lot of like the fun things from a childlike perspective. So, oops, I wrote this essay, but you know, when I saw myself in the American pop culture, it was often through the stereotypes, and it was often through the stock character that got recycled over and over and over. And a lot of my young work as an artist was in reaction to that stereotype, is trying to make sense of it, or trying to negate it, or to refuse it. And this one image right here is from a video game, which is strangely a Japanese video game, that uses the Western stereotype of the Turk as this perpetual stock character of the enemy, and makes it into this fictional planet. And it's a 1997 PlayStation game called an organization called the Turks. They're no longer even an ethnicity. And there's a scene where the Turks are sitting in a bar, and they're talking about their experience, and they're talking about how tough it is, and somebody needs to do it. And one of the characters says, well, it's been tough at times, but all in all, I'm glad I did it. So looking back to my art practice, this scene just sums it up, I suppose. It used to look like this. I used to make a lot of work that was interactive, performative, new media, video, digital, phygital, all of these like in the conceptual mostly. And in this one, it was called Are We There Yet? It was a holographic interactive installation. And the entity that the visitors interacted with was a holographic projection called the Grand Turk. And she was actually a reference to the mechanical Turk of the 18th century. You probably know Wolfgang von Kampelan's unbeatable mechanical Turk, which then gives rise to a lot of other popular American, like the Terminator, for example, borrows the mechanical Turk to make it be the brain of which would future Skynet be, which would then be the Terminators. Or Amazon's mechanical Turk, which is strangely enough is like how they named human exploitation. So there's a lot of these things are happening. So what the holographic interactive entity was doing was, back in 2016, was this AI that would try to come to make sense of itself in relation to how humans perceived it, with the understanding of this identity in the backdrop. So it was lots of hilarious conversations that were happening. So then one day back in 2018, I moved on to doing this work as part of this, trying to make sense of this identity that is the way that it is perceived outside, and then also with the political changes that is happening at home in Turkey, with, you know, the last 20 years of one party rule, one man rule, and the increasing authoritarianism and I hate to say it, but this fascism, I guess, I don't know how else to say it. And increasingly being done through controlling women's bodies. And women, so there was this conversation about women's hair started becoming a, like, you know, to keep your hair open, to keep your hair exposed, or the taboo, and all of these things. My notes disappeared. Excuse me. Speaker notes. Oops. Okay, I don't know what I did. So I'll just freestyle it. So I started thinking about the idea of hair, and why is it such a taboo Like, why are we talking about women's hair? Why our hair needs to be covered? And why do authoritarian religious groups, especially the Orthodox Abrahamic religions, have a problem with women's hair? So while doing this series, I started thinking about, of course, like all of these things that were happening, the 1979 Iranian Revolution and how the country was before, the picture on the top right. And Masih Alinejad, an Iranian journalist who took this picture that went viral on the internet. She was running through the streets of, I think it was in France, and she had her hair loose, and which set like this whole chain of my stealthy freedom, where women were taking off their heads, scarves, and just letting like wind in my hair was the slogan. And then thinking about what happened in Afghanistan and looking at the 1950s and 60s pictures, and they just seem like just an ordinary country with nothing out of the ordinary there, with emergence of the Taliban and how they were praised in the beginning as freedom fighters and this and that in the Western media, led by, well, you know, all the stuff that's happened afterwards. And of course, Erdogan in the middle, 20 years just like overhanging. And I'm thinking about all of these, which led me to do Hair is a Woman's Glory. But also I was like looking at home. This is a picture from the city that I'm from originally. Women were beginning to be increasingly concerned about all of the liberties and their impositions on their lives being taken away, their freedoms limited. So they decided to make themselves more visible in public places. So this is from a bicycle tour called Chic Women's Bicycle Tour. And it started about a decade ago as a pushback against Erdogan's party and their policies that were aimed to limit their presence. So instead, they wanted to make themselves visible, and kind of similar to Woman Life Freedom in Iran. This one is City Woman Bicycle. And it originally started as the pushback, later started talking about environmental issues, of course, and they were successful. A lot of those limitations on their freedom in public spaces were actually taken back as a result of women pushing back. So I kept thinking about these as the driving force. Like these are the things that started influencing the aesthetic decisions that I started making as part of this work. I was noticing about like how these women were choosing to adorn their bodies with beautiful clothes. They were taking care of their hair. They were wearing makeup. They were like the like being visible wasn't enough for them. They were like the peacock in the room, like the male peacock. So I started, you know, continuing working on these. And of course, like what you're seeing here is the hair being photoshopped off. These are selfies that I took, kind of like my stealthy freedom. And then I started doing calligraphy, and the text is obscured, but it says hair over and over. And it was also a little bit of a play on the Iranian newspaper when they would sometimes like Photoshop hair coverings. So instead of photoshopping hair coverings, I was like playing with the idea actually of, well, what if we just like write the text word hair? Like why do we do it that way? And so practicing my hand at calligraphy to write such, the Turkish word such, meaning hair, over and over and over again, kind of obsessively. And while practicing, I was looking at things like this. This was the hat sanatı, as it is called in Turkish. It's called the calligraphic art, but it's also called line art, or art of line making. And so while I was like looking at these, I was also admiring how beautiful the shapes and the forms are, the symmetry, and how they kind of resemble these bimorphic bugs. This one is called Edeb Yahu, and Yahu is like dear God, but Edeb means manners, like manners, dear God. And I don't know what that is for, but I thought that was interesting. And so while practicing these, I had some Turkish kilim in my studio on the floor. I was doodling and looking at the carpet, pondering about the meaning of the hair. And somehow it led me to actually the motifs on the hair, where I was like searching about, well, why women's hair? Why is it a taboo? Why, you know, why is Medusa's hair turned into snakes? Why is Samsung hair as a source of power? So I was inching closer to mythology, and I actually found it on the kilim. And so for those of you who don't know, kilim is a flat weave Turkish rug, or more, maybe it's better to say Turkic, because it's not just, you know, practiced all over. And it's traditionally a craft practiced by women, and the motifs on it are ancient. They date back thousands of years, and they're mostly unchanged. They're still like handed down from mother to daughter. And particularly the hairband motif, and there are so many variations of these, or like the hairbrush is probably even better translation, are these decorative things that you wear on your hair to make yourself really like, you know, like peacock yourself, you know, peacock, show up all nice. And it basically symbolizes a celebration, a joyous occasion, something that you care to make yourself all nice, dressed up and be pretty for. But because of how they are also talismanic in power, like they did not just mean things, but they also held power, and these were woven on these rugs also to imbue them with powers, because this is an ancient shamanic religion still. So it would mean a desire for eternal life if the person who weave it used their own hair to put it into the rug. So to give an idea of like all these meanings, there's another one on the right. This is a woman figure motif from an 18th century rug fragment. And on the left is a woman and a child. And if the child is actually upside down, or the woman is upside down, I don't know which one of them is upside down. So this is what it means, like when you put them in relationship to others, like on its own, a child symbolizes innocence and life, and it is it represents how humans came to be formed, created. But with a woman figure, it can signify that it is a pregnant woman. With a scorpion or other figures, it tells other stories. So this is a scorpion motif, for example. It was used to protect the house. So coming back to the hairband motif, I was really interested in this idea of desiring immortality and eternity and searching for happiness, and still looking at practicing my hand at calligraphy while looking at things like this and doing this, coming back to looking at this. And somehow this emerged as my next body of work. And this is the first one that I did. And I suppose it's like looking at all of those calligraphic works that are, you know, neutral background with like just the dark text and the dark line mark making, that my first, this is the second one in line. This one happened. And then the third one emerged. And this one is using the water motif. So at this point, I started kind of thinking like, well, what am I doing? These are coming out intuitively. I'm enjoying myself. This is really nice. And I actually don't want to keep reacting to all the crap in the world. You know, like there's like how, I don't know, there was a time that I did this, but starting to do this on my own without any intention to show anyone what I was doing. And these were just coming out naturally and intuitively. But I started thinking about reflecting on like, why was I doing this? What was it about the brush? What was it about the mark making? What was it about the things that were so intimate and personal, but abstract? And I started Googling certain keywords. And of course, it was interesting that I found my elders, I would say, in Korea, from Dansekwa, which is the Korean monochrome painting that emerged in post-war Korea. And this is Liu Fan's work, and he's actually also uses the brush, and he makes these marks over and over until it starts to become erased or faded. And a lot of the Korean post-war work at that time looked to the Korean material culture to borrow its inspiration, to invent its own minimalism. And I was really interested to see one of the conversations where Liu Fan describes how the difference between Western minimalism and Korean minimalism was that whereas the West rejected tradition and history as reaction to World War II in the post-war period, Koreans did the opposite. They embraced their culture, material culture, to invent a new language to talk about the hard things that they couldn't talk about at the time politically. So that made me think, okay, I guess that is what I'm doing now, that it is becoming so hard to talk about, that's what I'm doing. So I continued on with this. This is number 10 by now. And I kept going. This is one motif from the kilim that I loved so much. I wanted to see it in yellow with the black dots on top. So I did it again with a just slightly larger this time in 2022. So I went back to that pattern. And that same year following, this was in spring that I did this. And then in the summer, I went to Romania and, you know, wasn't on purpose. I was walking by a restaurant, happened to be Turkish place. And then I saw this pillow right there. Somebody cropped the same composition and just used it on a pillow. And I thought, okay, so there's number 3 out there in the world somewhere. This is now this year's work that is now emerging. They're getting even bigger. So this is 39 by 59 inches. Some of them are smaller on paper, continuing on. And at this point, I'm not also just tracing the patterns on my own, but I'm inventing new patterns, merging the existing ones to create new ones. This is kind of like the scorpion octopus. And I don't know what this is yet, but ultimately they're called I Want to Live Forever. The end.
That's really amazing. Thank you both so much. I think we have time for us to have a Q&A, if that's okay. If you're across our time zones are available still. Oh my gosh, a lot. Well, if you don't have anything like right away to ask, I have a couple of questions. So I'll start first with Keoni, I guess. It was really, this was my first, well, I heard you speak before, but this was my first time seeing with the photos your journey during COVID to attend a film festival. I was just thinking, oh my gosh, this is like such an impromptu sort of makeshift, let's find a solution, this thing has to happen against the odds, like let's do it, and let's but also a lot of trust, right? Like a sense of I'm gonna cross, you know, this body of water, and I'll do my thing and come right back. And I wanted to know a little bit more about, okay, so you played to the advantages of your Americanness, you explained, but did you feel
in the moment,
yeah, sometimes like when you needed to, like it's a tactic, right? Did you feel any outsiderness from anyone that made you feel like you shouldn't really be there? You know what I mean? Because when I'm seeing your documentaries, when I'm looking at your interaction with Romeo and the professor you interviewed about the history of the Civil War, and you were explaining in the previous talk that she was actually being censored for talking about some of these things that are not part of the official record, right? It feels so in friendship and in trust, like there's this kind of an embracing, you are there, you're part of the community. And I just wanted to understand if at any time you felt like you're kind of overstepping or shouldn't be there, or made to feel like you should be on the outside, you know what I mean, as a kind of in the tradition of a documentary filmmaker arriving from the West, right?
Yeah. I think it just has a lot to do with, like, I have, to answer your question bluntly, no, I never felt like an outsider. I think I have a really good understanding of how a lot of people in the film industry do business, like when we talk about the mainstream. And it's exceptionally impersonal. It's so impersonal that it was like often difficult for me when I was working like for Discovery Channel and, you know, finding myself on sets and doing these interview shoots where like someone's crying for like 9 hours and the producer's like, we're, you know, like to us in the back, he's just like, we're here to make TV, not to make people feel comfortable, you know? So for me, and it's just the way I am. It's not so much that I just have that professional perspective from my time in New York, but just who I am. It's like when I know I'm an eternal guest. I'm just a guest at all points in the road, you know. And yeah, and that shines through. And like, you know, people usually set forth kind of boundaries and rules, especially when you embark on these projects, like almost immediately. And as long as you adhere by those rules, as long as you're polite, you know, and like the rhythm of most things in life is like, yeah, when you get to know people, you're kind of getting to know them. But like with Romeo, rather quickly, it's like I could, you know, at first I was taking my shoes off at the door, and then it's like, no, you can leave your shoes on. You know what I mean? It's those little things. It's I know it sounds kind of like, what is he even talking about? But it's just kind of my whole mentality is come correct. Just come correct, treat people how you'd want to be treated, and have that guest mentality. I'm not trying to take over. I don't schedule things like with these like we have to shoot this much footage in a day. I'm always checking in with, like, I always check in with people who are in my work. Like, hey, do you need a break? Make sure that they have water. Make sure that they have food. In Romeo's case, make sure he has some beer. You know, so it's yeah, all those things go a long way to achieving a goal. And yeah, the only time I felt out of place or like an outsider was actually at that film festival. Those French people absolutely fucking hated me, but they loved the film. They just did not, they almost, it almost seemed like they met me and then thought that they had made a mistake by inviting me, which is, or yeah, I don't know. I don't know. As soon as they realized just how American I am, that I'm actually like a tried and true American, um, I don't know what they thought. Maybe they thought I was like of Surinamese descent, or I don't know what they thought. But it was like a cold week. Like I had a good time. They kept wanting to show the film and scheduling all these special screenings. They loved the film. But that was the thing, is like the folks from the Ministry of Culture, they were pretty cold towards me. But those people within the ministry and attached to the ministry who were like of Maroon descent, who were Afro Guyanese, who are Afro-Surinamese, who happen to be there, they showed me a ton of love, you know, based on the work. So yeah, it's always yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I don't pay attention really. Like in Suriname, I know there's people that just, because of who I am, they have an issue with me. But I don't really lend them much credence, you know? Yeah. Yeah. I hope that answers your question. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you're looking at, by the way, you said caiman, I said alligator, apologies, now I know. When you're looking at some of the landscape, right, the mud and the sort of like difficult roads to trespass and these like wild dangerous animals, right, anaconda or caiman, but you're showing the place like it's and the entire surrounding and your interactions with the people and everything around it, right, through so much familiarity, right? It's like an extension of a home. And it's the
Mhm.
complete reversing or inversing of that entire sort of ethnographic documentarian sort of tradition. And I feel like
Yeah.
that sort of embracing is also being returned to you. That's why I was
Yeah.
asking this question.
Thank you for that. I think, the last thing I'd like to say is I think if people really understood how little people, places, and things are kind of valued, and like animals are valued in the pursuit of making some of these more mainstream projects, I think it would actually turn a lot of people off, you know?
Mhm.
And I kind of feel like I talked about at the beginning, it's a bit of a shamanic theme. It's like to imbue something with the essence of intention. I think that's what my work does. I think one of my intentions moving forward needs to be making more money. But outside of that, I think if people really understood like, what it's like with a film crew that goes into Suriname to like do a documentary or one of these other exotic locales, it's like it's all about the thing. It's all about the project. It's all about what's coming out the other end. It's not about establishing anything warm or even humanitarian, if you will. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Keoni. And I have one question to Ilknur, if I may, if I'm not taking too much space talking. When it's really interesting, I also heard you talk many times, right? Like we work very closely together, and I feel like every time I hear you present, I'm learning something new, something other, that adds on to the depth of your conceptual thinking of how you got to be doing this new series, this new body of work, the dots that you say, these dots, right? And it's really fun because this time around, when you showed the calligraphy with the Edebiyahu, so it made me think about legibility and translatability, right? Where if you are speaking of the outsider, this is why I began with Keoni and I'm coming to Ilknur. If you're an outsider, you're going to look at that and registered as some sort of Middle Eastern Arabic, maybe something like that, calligraphy, something folk, something traditional, right? But also something phallic, right? I don't know if anybody else got it. But when you are a little bit of an insider and you put the two together, right? Edebiyahu is not originally Turkish, but it's borrowed into the integrated enough that you can say it's Turkish. It's sort of like saying, some manners, please, right?
Manners, please.
Manners, please. Like, I don't know, maybe there's like a Southern expression, like a bless your heart type of a thing, like manners, bless your heart, like that sort of a tongue-in-cheek like critique of, and it's this like beautiful calligraphic rendition of the phallus, right? But there's a lot that is supposed to be inaccessible, right? Not legible, not translatable. And then there's a lot that is blatantly obvious, right? Ridiculous, just humorous. And when I'm looking at your paintings and you're saying like these dots, right? I think you're playing with the same kind of insiderness, outsiderness, legibility, accessibility. And I think you're totally fine shutting out an entire audience, not to let them in, not to have that access to your work. And I think you're sort of turning around and saying, you're not who I'm trying to reach, right? I'm speaking to someone else right now. You're not the center of my attention. There's no room for you here. So I don't know. I wanted to understand if you're sort of making those decisions. You say very intuitively, but have you thought about like who your audience is and like those? Yeah, I just want to know a little bit more about that.
For sure. So my audience, I didn't know I was going to be painting for other people, like to see. It was, I have a slide there actually of, I can't even show it. I have it. Let me see. Sorry, I'm gonna go to that slide again, if I can find it without wasting. Actually, it's not even all that important. When I was working on the Hair is a Woman's Glory, that was a little bit of like me growing up in America and having to kind of answer, and that's what that ASAP essay was all about, where like you have to somehow answer about your identity, right? And you feel like you need to then explore it yourself as you answer to it, because you know it's wrong, but you need to also understand how to talk about why it's wrong, if that makes sense at all. And through doing that work, you know, I went to grad school then and graduated and went back to Turkey and then lived that time, and Erdogan was still just new, fairly. And it was a bit of a shock. I don't remember, like, it was almost like I went to somewhere that was familiar, that I spoke the language, but the culture was familiar enough, but it was not as I remember it. Things were definitely different now, and things were getting more and more different and more difficult. And you know, as the years progress now, looking back to the last decade, yeah, I mean, that it is becoming very heated and difficult. But around that time I realized, and then I came back to the United States, of course, that changed the way that I was also making work, because I also felt like I needed to then now explore, well, why did this happen? Why is home being like that? Why is the place that I think of home no longer feels like home? Why does it even feel hostile and strange and unfamiliar? And that was one of the things, was that Hair is a Woman's Glory was a project that I wanted to do for like a decade. Like, it started actually in 2009 while I was still in Turkey. And I kept I started making something, and it just seemed wrong, right? Like, it just felt wrong, because all these battles are being fought on women's bodies, and I didn't want to participate. I didn't want to like sharpen my brush and get out there and fight this war. But it also felt like something I needed to talk about as a woman, that was concerning me. Like, what is this? Why are these follicles on my head a problem? You know, why? So I needed to explore that. And I think with Hair is a Woman's Glory was finally my way to do that. And I felt good doing it. But also while doing that, it was almost like, while I was trying to social critique, I started looking at these works that are read as religious works. Some of them are not, some of them are secular, but they are written in the Arabic font. So for the conservative population, will immediately assume it's religious. And they will look at like the Ottoman era artists who would do this calligraphic art, and they would in retrospect think of them as religious artists, when in fact they were actually, well, artists of their time who were just doing work. And so there are a lot of like things do get disconnected, and it's okay. And it became personal for me to discover and learn about all these things and make peace, like connect. And that's why I became like, as soon as I found out about Korean artists and Japanese artists after, World War II, and how they were connecting back, and it was rough times and they needed to heal from all of that. So my audience then became not important anymore. Like, it wasn't, whereas my previous work was really trying to talk to people, my new work was more like, well, I'm going to learn some things and I'm going to explore all these intuitively, and it's going to be for me, because this is now important. And in the beginning, it was not even like, I didn't paint. I wasn't a painter. It wasn't like that. But then later, it felt important that I couldn't stop. And I didn't want to do anything else anymore either. And then I'm like, maybe I became a painter. So then I decided that maybe I should show these things. And as you say, it's not important that they don't need to be the way that I used to do work anymore. And that became okay too.
Thank you. Well, we started 5 minutes later, so we could have 5 minutes more if you have questions for each other or for me, or anything else to add that you didn't get a chance to say. This is my time. Say any questions.
Any questions? I have so many, but gosh, which one to ask?
Well, one thing I want to know is what's next for the two of you. What are you currently working on or planning to launch? That's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah. Who goes first?
Okay, Ilknur first and then Keoni.
Well, okay, so in terms of a body of work, I'll just focus there because there's too many things going on. Well, with that said, like how I'm a painter now. I'm not doing in multimedia installation, experimental, conceptual, da 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 da, but it's still in me. It's hard to turn that off too. So I have this idea of doing an installation with magnetic paint that responds to touch, kind of like your phone touch screen that works on the moisture detected on your fingertips. So this is a plant paint that has some iron conductivity in there, and it responds to the moisture. So I want to make these into big spaces on the walls, on the floors, everywhere. And some of them paint these with these like touch paint or tactile paint or conductive paint. Conductive paint is the better word. And introduce sound into it, because all of these motifs are whispers from the past. They're little snapshots of things that people lived, and that's why they did them. And it's okay that you don't understand the full story, but you get a sense of what was happening. So one of the ideas that I'm working on right now in my mind is this installation piece where you walk through and, you know, don't touch the art. Well, in this one, you do get to touch the art. So when you run your fingers through them, it activates them and the walls begin to whisper certain things. And one of the things that I was thinking about, spoiler, well, it's probably not even going to happen. It's going to change a billion times, so it's okay. Like right now, my idea is to have bunch of people record a snippet from Sufi, Jalaluddin Rumi's quote from one of his poetry that says, "We come whirling out of nothingness, scattering stars like dust," if I remember that correctly. And so he's, you know, he's a poet of like 16th century, was he? I can't remember. Anyway, his journey life began in Central Asia, and he was exiled through political turmoil. He found home in the then Ottoman Empire. He settled his house, and then he opened it, and it was a house of love and acceptance. And he said, "Come as you are, whatever you are, no matter who you are or where you're from. Anywhere, this is not a house of despair. This is a house of love." So I want to kind of, you know, speaking of embracing and loving and hanging on to your roots, regardless of all the crap of the world, like you just like, you know, just like the Korean masters, I guess. I want to hang on, and that's my minimalism. Like that's my conceptual art. That's my thing now. I'm just gonna hang on and not let go.
Thank you. And we'll hear from Keoni.
No, it's crazy. Ilknur, you took my idea for the touch paint. I'm joking. That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. I don't know that wow. I should have gone first. I want to hear more about the touch paint. We'll talk about it later. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I think I'm going to shift. I'm going back to Suriname, and I'm probably going to shift focus a little bit more on the wire sculptures. Do a show in Suriname, possibly with a few Surinamese artists, one or two. Try to infuse the wire with clay and pottery. So one artist who specializes in clay, you know, maybe they make a part of the animal body, and then the other, you know, the mid part or maybe the face is wire. We'll see what we do. I already laid some of that foundation and planted some of those seeds during my last trip. So when I return, I'll just be following up. I think making more of a footprint for myself in Suriname is definitely at the forefront of what I'm trying to do in the near term, while continuing to take advantage of opportunities abroad to have work shown. And then my next video project, I think I'm actually going to write a story first. So not a script, but a story. And it won't be a documentary, but it'll be a narrative film. But something is telling me to write in story form first, and then I will adapt to make a film. And I don't know why, but that's kind of what my intuition is telling me to do. And so that's what I'm going to stick with. And the film will have to do with, and the story will have to do with Suriname finding oil. So there's several companies in Suriname that have found oil just offshore. And of course, everyone thinks, $20 bills are going to fall from the sky once that happens. However, as an outsider, I could foresee certain ramifications with oil being found in a country like that. So yeah, the film will sort of be centered around what's happening with oil and whatnot, but also telling a very sort of local story as well. So yeah, that's me in the near term.
Nice.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure to
And
do
you?
anything with the two of you. What's next for me? Well, I'm putting together the book project that was originally supposed to be what Postcollapse art was, a book project. Yes, so stay tuned to watch our website we will issue a call for work, essays, poetry, but also visual art and film stills and everything like that, to kind of create an source book on art since '89. Yeah, in short. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Vuslat.
Thank you. Yes.
And thanks to ASAP 14.
Yes. Thank you, ASAP.
Have
Bye.
a great day or night, all of the above.
Yes.
We'll
All
talk
to
soon.
you too.
Day, night, and
Peace.
day. Bye.